Okay, so we are just in Patrick's huge backyard, and I'm going to interview him. I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. I don't think you've ever done like an interview like on a YouTube channel before. You've done it many times, like for like TV and everything like that. So I guess I'll start with like a few questions here. Like, what's your sport? What's your job, etc.
Yeah, so until 2016, I was my main thing that I was doing was actually the competitions, strongman competitions. And in the last 3 years, I've been mainly public speaking.
Yeah.
Since in 2016, I just retired from strongman, and so my main thing right now is actually public speaking.
How did you get into strongman?
So I started actually training with a friend of mine back then. We were fans of professional wrestling, so we just wanted to basically get stronger for that. We were really focused on training, and pretty quickly became interested in competitions. So the first competitions that I did were powerlifting competitions, like bench press and powerlifting, and then later on, I think I was 19, when I did my first bodybuilding competition. So bodybuilding was then the next thing that I tried. I did that for 3 years in the juniors category, was pretty successful. And then in 2006, I started doing strongman. And that's what I did pretty much for the rest of my career.
You're pretty good at strongman. You actually hold like a bunch of world records in strongman. Can you like explain like what they mean and what they are and everything?
Okay, so in strongman, it's so the world record in strongman is first of all a little bit different than, let's say, a world record in weightlifting. Because we have so many events. So it's when you have a record in weightlifting for your category, it means that like you only have two things that you can set a record at in your category. So in strongman, the factors are flipped. You have many categories in weightlifting. We basically only have two. Yeah, there's.
I honestly don't know anything about strongman. So there's only two categories. There's like the 105 I heard, and that's only like in the amateur ranks.
It used to be only one category. So before I started actually training for strongman, there was only one category. The specific reason why I started doing strongman is because they introduced this 105 category, this lightweight category. That was in 2005, and then in 2006 I did my first competitions, because I considered myself, well, I can't compete with these giants that normally do strongman competitions, but I thought, well, the lightweight category might be something that I can try. And that's what I did in the first few years. Then later I switched to heavyweights, because I just basically found out that I was actually pretty competitive against the heavyweights on national level too. So I went on and became a heavyweight. So there's only these two categories. So which means that you can't try to go sneak yourself into one category to make it as as doable as possible for you to get a record. You can't do that. But on the other hand, we have like almost unlimited amounts of different events, so that you can just look for something where you're really good at. And for me, that would be everything overhead and everything just basically where my small stature is not in the way.
That's the thing of strongman. I know it's like all the best strongmen are pretty much like over 6'2", 6'3". Would you say? Yeah. And why do you think that's an advantage in strongman?
I would say 2/3 of these events actually big guys actually have an advantage at. And then in 1/3 of the categories, it helps more if you're shorter. Like everything that's pressing, obviously, that is akin to a squat or something like that. That will be easier for a shorter guy. But then we have things like the Atlas stones, where you have to just basically grab this huge concrete ball, and you have to put it on a platform. When you're big, you have longer arms, so you can actually grab it much better than someone with shorter arms. Like I grab it like this, and then the huge guys, they go like this. This is obviously easier. And then also the platform is the same height for everyone. So if you're short, you just sometimes have to make an overhead lift with it just to get on the platform. So and most events are like that. It's actually helpful if you just pack a lot of muscle, and then when your frame is only this size, I mean, even if I go like my limit would be probably like 150 kilos or something like that, where if I would gain more weight, it would just be in the way because I couldn't, I wouldn't be able to move well.
Yeah.
So
what was your highest body weight?
The highest was in 2016, just before I had the injury, and that was almost 140 kilos.
And like most strongmen, like how heavy would they be?
Well, usually the guys who are like top level, they go anywhere between 167, I would say probably 170 to more than 200.
Wow,
that's
crazy.
And it's not possible if you have a smaller frame. It's not possible to pack that kind of muscle on that frame.
Like recently, you got criticized on the Joe Rogan podcast for not having like real strongman records or whatever. Can you explain to me like how strongman works? Like, is there like multiple federations like there is in powerlifting, and like what do your records actually mean? Are they like within like the 105 kilo category, or honestly I don't know anything about strongman, so I'll let you explain.
So I wouldn't actually say I was criticized, because it was just two guys speaking about me, and none of the two guys had any info. And one of the two guys had an agenda that he wanted to achieve. So Rogan basically wanted to find something to criticize the film that I'm part of, the Gamechangers. And he was...
And the film was even out.
So
he just saw the 2-minute long trailer.
Exactly. So the only thing that he had at his hands was a trailer. And he was just looking for a way to criticize this thing that he didn't know anything about with this guy that he doesn't know anything about. And he had someone sitting in front of him who also knows nothing about me. And also actually, so Robert Oberst doesn't really know a terrible lot about strongman. And he acknowledged that in the podcast, because the problem is the guy started doing strongman in 2012. That's like what I did my first world championships in 2007. That's like half a decade after I did my first worlds. The guy did his first competition. So he's a rookie basically in strongman. He's a very good strongman. He's just naturally a very gifted athlete. It's just the opposite of me. Like, he's very tall, he has a huge frame, and he just has a lot of natural strength. But he doesn't have a lot of knowledge about strongman. So the guy doesn't know who I am. And then they were looking up stuff on the internet to just basically find out if I'm legit or not.
Like a Google search.
And here's the problem. But here's the problem. The problem is that they just mixed up all kinds of shit, because they found just basically some records, some deadlift records that are not connected to me, that are from a completely different guy. They just read, vegan athlete, and the other guys, so the guy's name is Dr. Noon Amen Ra, I think.
Not a fan of him.
Whatever. So it's a guy who apparently eats very low calories, but still claims that he can build a lot of muscle with it. I'm not going to go deep on that, but I don't have anything obviously to do with him. So they just took facts that are about the guy and just projected that on me. And then try to make an argument that something I do is not legit or not. So let's go back to the records. There are basically a few, there are a lot of small federations that nothing you do there counts, because it's just not well organized. Like, for instance, there is a natural strongman competition that I actually did a competition at. It's complete shit. But then there are serious federations, and the serious federations are just basically 3 different organizations. The one is the North American Strongman Association, that also runs, for instance, the Arnold Classic. So that's one big organization. Then the other big organization is obviously the World's Strongest Man, and they have their own qualifying series and so on. And then there's the Strongman Champions League, and that's like basically the biggest federation here in Europe, and they do a lot of events in China and all around the world. And that's where I mostly did most of my competition. I have only done one competition, one qualifying competition for the World's Strongest Man. And there's actually a good reason for that too. A lot of so there's basically what happened in this interview with Rogan is that the guy said, well, I never saw the guy at World's Strongest Man, which is correct. I have never competed there. And there's a specific reason for that.
Why is that?
So the reason for that is the World's Strongest Man used to be in September every year.
Okay.
It was pretty much on the same time. And in all those years that I have mainly competed in strongman, I also studied psychology.
Oh, okay.
And at the university, September is exactly where we have all our exams. So there was no way for me to do the competition. That's why I only tried to even qualify once. I didn't do well in that competition, didn't qualify in that one. But I only tried it once, and I never really went for it because there was no point, because it was just overlapping with my exams.
Makes sense. So, like in your peak, would you say you'd be able to qualify for the World's Strongest Man competition?
Yeah, I think if like in 2016, for instance, what really stopped me was my injury, when I tore my tricep. If I wouldn't have got injured myself, I think the level was definitely there. There are actually athletes who are not even on that level that I was at, that qualified for World's Strongest Man and went there. There's also another problem with the World's Strongest Man. So there is a qualifying series, but at the same time they are just randomly sometimes inviting athletes. Like for instance, there was this one year where they invited just the top 3 in Germany. And they did that for multiple years, where they just invited like top 3s in bigger countries. And like if you use that as a measure for qualification, I would have been qualified for 4 years, because I was in the top 3 in Germany for 4 years. So it's not they did try to make it look like I wasn't on the level to qualify, which is bullshit. It has nothing to do with the level. And again, it has nothing to do with Robert and I. It's not about, because a lot of the guys, like in the comment section, try to frame it as if I would compare myself to Robert or anything else. Naturally and genetically, he's much superior to me. But I would say I definitely made much more out of my potential that I have than he did. And that's something completely different.
I guess like the point he was trying to make on the podcast, but I guess he just phrased it like pretty badly. He was saying that like, oh, you set all your world records in your backyard, which kind of made sense to me. Like I think he was trying to say, like in powerlifting, for example, there's like multiple federations. Like there's a couple of federations in Ireland alone, I think, and you can like set a world record by deadlifting 250 kilos. Like I think that's the point he was trying to make, but that isn't even true anyway, because the world records you hold in strongman are legitimate. Like the yoke walk, is that the heaviest ever yoke walk?
It was the heaviest. When I did it, it was the heaviest yoke walk I've ever done. And just to give you a feeling for if it was legitimate or not. So what I did back then is I contacted all the big federations. So I contacted Dion Wessels. Robert is gonna know who Dion Wessels is. She's basically running the North American Strongman Association, and she runs like the Arnold, parts of the Arnold and so on. I contacted her and asked her, what's the biggest yoke you have ever done? Then I contacted Colin Bryce of the World's Strongest Man, asked him, what's the biggest yoke you have ever done? So I contacted all these people who run these federations and asked for the biggest yoke they've ever done. And then I made sure that I'm like way above that. So back then it was the heaviest yoke that was ever done. They did heavier ones later, and like at the Arnolds they went crazy heavy in the years later, but they did it for shorter distances. I'm not even sure, because I did it for 10 meters, and then they started doing it for like 10 feet and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if they were actually aware of what I did and tried to actually break that, but didn't realize that they did it for feet and I did it for meters. So it doesn't really matter. But at the time where I set the world record, it was the heaviest yoke ever done. But that was exactly the point why I contacted all the federations. I didn't want to make a yoke walk that is like recognized by one federation or something. I wanted to do the heaviest yoke walk ever done. And that's exactly, I think, I could agree on with Robert, that it's only interesting if it's something that is like, you know, overall the heaviest thing. And that isn't the case with whatever they found about the deadlift thing. But everything that I've done, I always made sure that it's, you know, universally recognized. And it, of course, it doesn't have to do with backyard federations where you do some bullshit world records.
Which they do exist. Like in powerlifting, I know they do exist, like these bullshit federations. Like, why did you turn vegan?
Well, it just basically happened in 2 steps. I was vegetarian for 6 years, and then later I went vegan. And the main motivator was just basically that I was back in the day when I went vegetarian. I was rescuing animals all the time, so I was like putting a lot of time and energy into trying to help, wildlife. We lived near a forest back then, so there was a lot of wildlife with injuries and stuff like that, and we would just take care of it, my ex-girlfriend and I. And then at one point I just asked myself, well, you're putting all this time and energy into trying to help these animals. At the same time, you're eating other animals. Where, how does that make sense? So it was just basically a logical progression for me to say, well, if I'm interested in helping animals and helping them, suffer less, I want to not cause suffering by my, consuming behavior.
Of course.
So that was just basically me going vegetarian. And then in the 6 years that I was vegetarian, I just found out a lot of stuff about what happens in the dairy industry and what happens in the production of eggs and all these things. And then I just had to realize that it's just not enough to be vegetarian, because you're still, consuming eggs and dairy. You're still, supporting a lot of animal exploitation, and you don't really want to do that. My problem was that I wasn't really convinced that I could make, a vegan diet work with what I was doing. So it took me some time to just then finally make the decision to do it. And was just mainly because after winning Germany's Strongest Man as a vegetarian, I got a lot of media coverage, because it was like unheard of that the strongest guy in the country doesn't eat any meat. So I was in all kinds of newspapers and stuff.
That's cool.
And that was cool. And at the same time, I realized that I was influencing other people. So I thought, well, if now I'm acting like a role model, I should do a better job than just be vegetarian. That was just basically when I made the decision to progress and try veganism. And then I was very surprised when I found out that it was actually working better than before. And I was doing,
Your lifts went up.
Yeah, my lifts went up. I mean, not like in an explosion, but like over 5 years, they were constantly going up.
Yeah, of course you were trained beforehand, so you were closer to your peak.
Exactly, so I was already pretty close, and it was very surprising to me that I was able to progress much more. And I think that has to do with the fact that the way I was eating as a vegan was much healthier than the way I was eating as a vegetarian. And that health benefit just helped me to progress in the next 5 years.
Like a common argument I hear all the time is that you just maintained your level of strength on a vegan diet, and you built all your strength on a vegetarian diet or a meat-based diet. What do you think of that? Do you think that's a bullshit argument?
Yeah, it is a bad argument, and it shows that people don't look at the numbers. And then some of the numbers are also not really accessible for everyone. But I can tell you that if you look at my PRs, they were like way higher in 2016 after half a decade of being vegan than in 2011 when I was vegetarian for 6 years. And then if you compare that even to when I was still eating meat, like 6 years before that, they were way higher. So I was way stronger as a vegan than as a vegetarian and as a meat eater.
Yeah, and see, they would respond to that by saying, oh, you just secretly add meat to your diet.
I was in China at the World Championships, and then the Eastern European guy just basically watched me for 4 days, and then he came over to and all the athletes are eating together at the hotel. So the guy watches me for 4 days, and then he comes over and says, well, I'm watching you for 4 days. And I'm like, yeah, I noticed that. So he's like, can I sit on the table? And I invited him to sit there, and he just basically asked me, he said, well, I see that you only eat plants, but now tell me, what's the secret? When you go up to your room, are you eating the steak there? And I'm like, what the fuck? No, I'm not.
I don't know. I see like all the time with these like anti-vegan comments like against vegan athletes. Like they never actually like present research or say like what nutrient is actually deficient in the vegan diet.
No, because you can't.
Yeah, they just assert that like all vegan athletes can't build strength. They have literally no evidence against that.
Yeah, but because the problem is usually someone who is arguing like that is not arguing on research or not on arguing on like some kind of evolution that he has done, but arguing just on, I want to stay the way I am.
Yeah.
So that's basically their core argument, which is of course, well, scientifically seen, that's a very bad, very bad position. Yeah. So that's the problem they have. And then someone who is vegan and makes an argument in the opposite direction usually has progressed from where they are to, like, I was a meat eater before, so I've been there. So obviously I have a huge advantage in terms of experience and in terms of what I've learned on my way to being vegan. So, and that shows in the discussions. So it's like, sometimes it gets really dumb because people just don't do any research and they still try to, you know, just be a smart ass.
Where do you see like the vegan movement in like the future, the next like 10, 20 years?
Yeah, so basically most people are convenient and lazy, which means if you can make veganism and being plant-based easy and accessible.
Like it is in this city, it's very easy. Like there's a bunch of vegan restaurants.
Exactly, like in Berlin it is very accessible, but at the same time, if I compare the world now to the world when I went vegan like almost a decade ago, it has changed so much and everywhere. Like we even have like a vegan community in China and in all kinds of places all around the world. So the more that progresses, the more it's going to become mainstream. And then when you look at the global challenges that we face, like in terms of ecological challenges, climate change, deforestation, all these things.
Like many people don't realize that the Amazon rainforest, you know, the fires, that story, like that was actually pretty much caused by like cattle ranchers.
Yeah, so usually to produce animal protein, you need much more, basically much more land than to produce plant protein, because it is obvious, if you have plant protein, you can just eat it and that's it. But if you want to have animal protein, this animal first has to eat something.
Yeah, there's energy lost in the process.
Yeah, so there's a huge loss, so that means you have to produce more stuff. And that's the reason why the animal agriculture just needs a huge amount of land, and that's the reason why we have this deforestation. And at the same time, animal agriculture is a huge factor in terms of CO2 emission, and then you have methane from the cattle that is actually much stronger in its effect than CO2. So all of that is going to force us to go more towards a plant-based lifestyle. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to, you know, turn into vegans, but we have to reduce, you know, we have to reduce the amount of animal protein and the amount of animal foods that we eat. And I think the more that progresses, the more it is going to go towards having a lot of vegans too. And then at the end of the day, I think if you just think logically in terms of the ethics, there is really no reason to cause suffering that is not necessary.
Of course,
And consuming animals is not necessary for us. So you can make all the arguments about how you think you are stronger because you eat animals. The point is, you don't need it to survive, and you don't need it to thrive. Like, even if you make an argument that I'm not the best strongman, which is, of course I'm not, but
there's more important things than being strong.
Yeah, but the point is, I'm stronger than 99.9% of the world population, and I'm on a vegan diet for almost a decade. So it shows that you can still be fucking strong. So, and that's the older argument that you need. So that means that it is not necessary to consume animal products, and if it's not necessary, why would you bring suffering upon sentient beings if you don't have to? There's no logic in that. So I think we're going, like, I don't know the time scale and when we get there, but I think at some point it is going to be just normal to not eat animals.
A lot of people on YouTube have been making like a lot of like health arguments, I guess, against the vegan diet. And there's been a lot of like ex-vegans on YouTube coming out. What's your opinion on them?
So I don't know all the cases, but the cases that I know, if you take a close look at them, yeah, for instance, Tim is a good example. So that's a guy that I actually met in person. Super nice guy. Problem is, he's really not the smartest human being. And I don't mean that in a judging way. It's just he has done so many fringy things. Like, I don't want to start with drinking pee and all that stuff. But if you go raw vegan and then you you almost starve yourself, and then you think you don't have to eat something because you just look into the fucking sun and stuff like so all of that has nothing to do with being plant-based. It is just bullshit ideas. Yeah. So if you have all of that and that destroys your health, and here's where I get some serious issues with these guys and also with Tim. You do all of that bullshit and you destroy your health, and then you blame it on veganism. That's really bad, because I'm vegan and I'm eating very differently than he eats, and I'm never gonna have a problem with any deficiency because I eat a lot of shit. And I make sure that my body gets everything, and I don't think that I'm gonna sit in a park and look in the fucking sun and that's gonna give me some energy or anything. So if you're stupid and you fail at veganism, that's okay, but don't blame it on veganism. And I can actually also, I have an experience in that. So I actually had a time where I failed at vegetarianism. I had all kinds of problems, for instance, chronic iron deficiency, because I was having way too much dairy products, and that was blocking my iron absorption. And then I also had problems focusing and all kinds of things. So for a few months I went back to eating meat because I thought, well, I just simply can't make this work, and I wanted to see if it helps to go back on meat. First of all, it didn't help because I was still having a shitload of dairy and all that shit that was causing the problems. Second of all, and that's I think for me that's the issue I have with the ex-vegans. I never went out in this phase and said vegetarianism doesn't work. When someone asked me and said, "Oh, I heard you're vegetarian, but now you're eating meat," I said, "Well, I couldn't make it work, so I'm now trying if it helps if I go back on my diet I had before, if these problems go away." I was always blaming it on me because I thought, well, I probably have done something wrong. And that shows that you're someone who is able to question themselves and not a complete fucking idiot. And Tim, for going out, and then also this fucking moron, Bobby's perspective, you know, these people going out and blaming their bullshit and their stupid, just fucking brainlessness on veganism, that makes me fucking angry.
Yeah. So you have like a pretty big social media following, and you're pretty popular, like, in general. Like, you were recently in the movie Gamechangers. Can you talk to me about that?
Yep. So the Gamechangers is a documentary about, well, on the surface it is about plant-based athletes, but the core of it really is a lot of science that shows that you can be plant-based and be, well, that it helps you basically in terms of health. It helps you in terms of performance. It's like targeted more towards, I would think, more towards men than the other vegan documentaries that are out there, because there's a lot of stuff out there on health already and on ethics, and then also some documentaries that are basically making an argument on, you know, environment and that kind of stuff. What's really missing out there, what the filmmakers thought, is that something that actually gets to those people who are the farthest away from the idea of going vegan, and that's just basically, you know, what the Americans would call them jocks. So it is basically, I think, a huge part of Rogan's following, actually. And you know, people who are into paleo and keto and whatever bullshit that is out there, and now the carnivore diet and all that shit. So these people are really concerned about their masculinity, about performance. They want to be, you know, able to perform well in sports.
There's even research on that. People actually think that eating meat makes you manly.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because if you look at the biochemistry and you look at the physiology of it, being on a plant-based diet versus being on a heavy meat diet, what it actually does is a lot of meat impairs your blood flow. And if you know a little bit about anatomy, you know that you know, to have a hard-on, you need blood flow. So if you impair that, you know, you can make your own argument what that is going to do to your manliness. So the film is not only about boners, but we have that in the film too. But what I was just basically saying is that it has a huge amount of great athletes. I mean, as behind and in front of behind the scenes, and then also in the cast itself. I'm just a part of the whole thing, but then the story is actually told from the viewing point of James Wilkes, who is the winner of the 9th edition of the Ultimate Fighter, UFC fighter, and which basically got injured 8 years ago, and while being injured started doing a lot of research on nutrition and all kinds of things to see how we can recover faster from that. And then basically found out that the gladiators were vegetarians, and then went on to read more into this, vegetarian and meatless thing and so on. Then became plant-based himself. Had, like the most cases, great results with it. And then he had this idea to make a film just about his own journey and include other athletes in it. Yeah, that's cool. And that's basically the film.
Cool. Yeah, I'll be watching it soon. What is the stupidest YouTube comment you ever got? Because there's multiple YouTube comments.
Oh, this is super hard actually. So there's this. So I have this video where I'm just showing what I eat over the whole day, and then there's a little bit of training footage in it too. And then I think I did some like push press, overhead press, something. Yeah. So this guy tells me, well, you're using a lot of momentum for your lifts. You should stop doing that because you're not going to get any gains on that. That was the most ridiculous thing, because I thought, well, what do you think are the gains I'm going for? I'm just trying to move weight. That's what I train for. So yeah, that was funny.
And what's the stupidest anti-vegan comments you have ever gotten on social media?
It's just basically when people think that to be vegan you need to take a lot of supplements, and then specifically again in this same video I'm showing my supplements that I take. And now the funny thing is, it's the same supplements I was taking as a meat eater, and the same supplements are taken by meat-eating strongmen. So it has to do with the sport. It doesn't have to do anything with veganism. But people try to make an argument about that, like you have to take these supplements as a vegan, which is of course bullshit.
All right, I guess we'll finish there. Thanks for the interview.
Thank you.